North Korea is the most unusual country on the planet, separated by an iron curtain from the rest of the world. It is the subject of constant contradictions. Some consider North Korea's policy of isolation to be wonderful and use it as an example, while others dig up articles about starving people, cult of personality, and censorship, calling the country a tyrant. We do not claim that you will come to a definitive answer by the end of the video. Our job is history, and now you will learn how North Korea was formed, how it 3 times brought the world to the brink of a Third World War, and became the cause of the war between China and the United States. It will be very fun, and even more fun with your comments on whether you would like to visit North Korea, because this country is unusual. And before we go back in time, you should know one simple fact that will tell you more about North Korea than hours of video. In 2014, the World Cup was held in Brazil, and North Korea failed to qualify, and their neighbors in South Korea decided to play a joke. The capitalist Southerners put together a funny video where footage from the World Cup was superimposed on a match from North Korea, creating the impression that North Korea had won the World Cup. And what did you think? The only TV channel in North Korea calmly published the video, calling it completely truthful. As a result, all of North Korea still believes that their national football team is the world champion, and all because there is no internet, no independent media in the country. However, these are already details, and now we will delve into history. It's about 1,300 years before our era, and a state formation appears on the Korean peninsula. She is called Ancient Chosun and covers the entire space without division into north and south. The exact date is still being questioned by scientists. Some say that the prototype of Korea was formed only in 300 BC, while others go further, claiming that Chosun was founded 4,000 years ago. Interestingly, its capital is considered to be ancient Pyongyang, not Seoul, which was not yet on the map back then. But it is not so important. It is important that the country did exist for quite a long time, and in addition to the peninsula, it even controlled a part of southern China. Actually, historically it was China that Koreans had relations of various degrees of kindness with, and it was the Chinese Han Dynasty that destroyed and conquered the prototype of independent Korea in 108 BC. For 1,000 years, the peninsula was under unclear control. There were 3 kingdoms here, Silla, Beach, and Goguryeo, and only in 935 AD did the peninsula become united again. It was then that the word Koryo appeared, which later became the prototype of Korea. For several centuries, the guys developed culture and science, but later they fell under the Mongol distribution. Eventually, they managed to avoid it, and in 1392 the Real Korea was born. At first, it was called Joseon, and later, the Korean Empire. It was at this stage that Seoul was founded, which became the capital. And it was at this stage that Japan intervened. Pirates from this country had been raiding Korea since ancient times, but by the end of the 19th century, the claims were becoming something more, and in 1910 Korea became a Japanese colony. I can't say it was all that bad. Life expectancy doubled under the Japanese, schools began to open, and it wouldn't be wrong to say that modern Korean culture is Japanese heritage. Even the first university in Seoul was opened by the Japanese Governor-General Saito Makoto. He also launched newspapers and banned corporal punishment. However, in addition to the positives, there were also negatives. They included assimilation, purges, and other joys of life. But, as everyone knows, following World War II, Japan suffered a defeat and, along with it, Korea became free once again. Here is where it gets interesting, because it was only a matter of hours before it became free. The entire Korean peninsula was occupied by the armies of the USSR and the USA, who had just defeated Japan, and of course, they did not want an independent piece of land. Initially, as a temporary measure, Soviet troops occupied the north and the USA occupied the south. The division followed the 38th parallel, but it was only conditional. The two countries did not intend to divide Korea. They were trying to create a government, and of course, they failed. The Soviets were interested in communism, and the USA was interested in capitalism. As a result, on August 15, 1948, the Republic of Korea was proclaimed throughout the territory controlled by the Americans. Seoul became the capital, and 3 weeks later, the USSR retaliated by forming the Korean People's Democratic Republic. Just for a moment, this happened only 70 years ago. We hope you now understand that there was no historical subtext to the division of Korea. For millennia, a unified and identical people lived on the peninsula, and the big guys in the form of the USA and the USSR simply divided it to satisfy their imperial ambitions. Even the borders were arbitrary, with lines drawn where troops were stationed. Leave comments if you want to see a video about South Korea, but for now, we are interested in the North. And it was all fun there. The ruler of the newly formed North Korea became captain of the Red Army Kim Son-ju, who later changed his name to Kim Il-sung. As expected in any totalitarian country, a cult of personality immediately began around Kim Il-sung, and he held unlimited power thanks to the full support of the USSR and the growing power of Communist China. Kim Il-sung declared South Korea occupiers, and they did the same in response. With a simple stroke of the pen, the US and USSR created one of the most unstable regions in the world. Calls for war and the unification of Korea were heard from both sides, and each side believed they were right. Only in 1949 did South Korea commit 2,617 armed invasions, violated the air border 71 times and the civilian border 42 times. The neighbors did the same, and everyone understood that war was looming. However, the example of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was fresh, so the USSR was afraid to give the green light for the operation. Kim Il-sung visited Moscow dozens of times and asked for approval, but he was consistently denied a full-scale war. On the other hand, China hinted that it would gladly help North Korea in the confrontation, so the situation was ambiguous and critical. It became even more critical when the USSR tested the atomic bomb and became the second nuclear power in the world. In March 1950, Kim Il-sung again came to pay tribute to Stalin, who finally gave the green light for the war. Naturally, the official USSR did not participate in it, but the North Korean army was fully equipped with Soviet aviation tanks and advisors, and 500,000 Chinese were called volunteers, and officially Beijing did not enter the war. Initially, North Korea took Seoul and almost the entire peninsula on its own. In the best traditions, on June 15, 1950, 175,000 people suddenly crossed the border into South Korea and with the support of tanks and aviation, quickly conquered almost everything. The US did not believe in the war and was in shock, and the much smaller South Korean army did not have tanks and was completely defeated. 90% of its territory was taken by North Korea, and it seemed that there was no hope. Only on September 15th, reinforcement from the UN began a full-fledged counterattack. British, US, and Allied troops held a real reckoning. In a month, they reached Pyongyang and took it. Do you think the fun ended there? Not at all. The arriving 500,000 supposed volunteers from China again swung the pendulum, using the element of surprise. Beijing's troops, with the help of the USSR, smashed the Americans and took Seoul back. It would be funny if the war was not accompanied by thousands of casualties on both sides. As a result, by February 1951, the war had reached a stalemate. In fact, both sides were in the same positions as a long time ago. But despite this, negotiations at the UN continued for another couple of years. The decisive moment was the death of Stalin in 1953. After that, the USSR quickly announced its desire to end the war. However, it should be understood that at that time, South Korea was no less, and perhaps more belligerent than the North. The establishment of the Bado League alone is worth mentioning, as according to various estimates, its supporters executed from 60,000 to 1 million people accused of communist views. For many years, the US government denied this genocide, but the fact remains a fact. During the peace talks of 1953, it was the United States and South Korea that rejected the terms of the armistice. But in the end, they did reach it, and each country went its own way. South Korea gave birth to Samsung, LG, Kia, and other giant corporations, while North Korea gave birth to a bunch of memes and tried to continue on its own path. After the breakdown in relations between the USSR and China, Kim Il-sung came up with an official ideology called Juche, and its essence is simple: the North Korean people should achieve everything independently, without any outside help. In simpler terms, this is isolationism, under which North Korea remains separated from the rest of the world to this day. Whether this is good or bad is not for us to decide. However, even now, according to human rights defenders' estimates, 1/3 of the North Korean population is starving. The worst case in history is known as the Arduous March. Over 4 years, from 1995 to 1999, it claimed the lives of between 10,000 and 3 million people, depending on various estimates. However, the government claims that the West and its sanctions are to blame, which, as you know, are constantly imposed, mainly due to militarism and the loud cries of North Korean leaders. The guys have been working on creating nuclear weapons since the 1970s, and in 2005, Kim Jong-il announced that North Korea had it. And in 2015, his successor, Kim Jong-un, announced that North Korea also possesses a hydrogen bomb. The United States has long been trying to put pressure on North Korea, but time and time again, all attempts have failed. In the 1990s, Bill Clinton even discussed the possibility of a missile strike on the nuclear reactor in Yongbyon, but the idea was abandoned because South Korea was nearby and no one wanted a repeat of the war. After all, this time it could be even more devastating. As a result, a fragile order was established, under which the United States constantly demands that North Korea eliminate its nuclear arsenal, imposing sanctions, while North Korea, in turn, prepares for war or declares its intention to eliminate its nuclear weapons and join the global community, depending on its mood. The current leader even met with Donald Trump, where progress in relations was discussed. However, almost immediately after that, news of new tests followed, and everything returned to square one. North Korea is truly the most unusual country on the planet. The position of ruler is passed down through inheritance, and access to the internet is only granted with permission from the party and in strictly designated places. People still do not know what is happening outside their country, and yet they are the same Koreans as the guys from South Korea. Just 70 years ago, the strong of the world decided to show off their power, and as a result, a unified people are still divided to this day. And the Korean War alone claimed the lives of almost 4 million people from all over the world. It is no wonder they say that history teaches nothing, and North Korea is a vivid example of that same history that we need to know. See you soon, friends.